Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video, and it's that time once again, as a tradition, around my birthday, to review some of my all-time favorite films. Yes, and that's right, you read the title, one of the first films that I'll be reviewing, which, yeah, I would definitely say this is in my top favorite films, and, well, one of my top favorite animated films. It's in there, you know. But, yeah. So that's right, guys. I am finally reviewing what is, if not, an animation cult classic from Warner Brothers, from the man himself, Brad Bird, this being his directorial debut, what he would bring to this amazing classic animated feature film. It's amazing. It's really amazing what went down into this animated film, and, you know, the fact that when it came out, you know, sadly, while critics praised it, it was a box office disaster. But as time went on, and over the years, it drew more attention, got more appreciation and such, and yeah, just, it's amazing. Yeah. And without this animated film, well, Brad Bird, look what he would do next, you know, in the realm of animation. Yeah. So that's right, guys. I am finally reviewing from 1999, The Iron Giant. Yes. The Iron Giant. Again, what an amazing animated film this is. From just everything about it, from beginning to end. It's amazing. Yeah. The first things I have to say about The Iron Giant, well, if I remember correctly, because one of the first times I knew about this film and watched some of it, I want to say, yeah, because I think I saw this maybe when one of the Disney networks were showing this, or maybe Cartoon Network, I don't know, but overall, I remember seeing it on TV, and I had seen the iconic, you know, poster and such, you know, with the Iron Giant, and yeah, over time, and when at one point I got a DVD copy, I had watched the film, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, because the first time that I did watch it fully, I enjoyed it, and knowing that Brad Bird, the same dude who would bring us The Incredibles, did this film, it's amazing, and, you know, and over time, and, the more I had watched it and had gotten a Blu-ray copy, yeah, yeah, because I really have come to appreciate this more, and this being in my top favorite movies, so, yeah. Yeah, and also, looking at the behind-the-scenes of The Iron Giant, and if anybody has seen that documentary of The Iron Giant, The Giant's Dream, which is featured on the Blu-ray, but you can also find it on YouTube, yeah. Yeah, it's really good, yeah. Because, you know, Brad and his team trying to accomplish, you know, making a really good animated feature film, but like I said earlier, when it was finally released, yeah, it didn't look that good. You know, especially Warner Brothers, yeah, Warner Brothers sometimes, they can be quite a handful, but still, yeah. What happened, and they didn't do that much promotion for The Iron Giant, like, oh my gosh. And to think that Warner Brothers was wanting to really go at it with hand-drawn animated features, as in the mid-90s, that was really kicking off, you know, and most notably Disney, but I'll talk more about that when I talk about some background. But yeah, to finish the first things I have to say about The Iron Giant, it's a masterpiece. A cult classic animated feature film from Brad Bird, Warner Brothers, need I go on? It's amazing. It really is. Yeah. Okay, so, about background. Long story short, yeah, because if you know a lot about the background, the history, and the making of the Iron Giant, you know. But yeah, I'll try my best to keep it brief. But yeah, because, for Brad Bird, in this case, I'm sure as you all know, ever since he was a child, he had been fascinated with making films, and when he was drawn into the world of animation, like most notably when he went to see The Jungle Book at a young age, and when later on he would be a part of Cal Arts, and he, along with so many other great familiar faces in the realm of animation, from John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, the other big names of Pixar, which Brad would be one of them, Ron Clements, John Musker, Tim Burton, even still Steven Hillenburg, the creator of SpongeBob. He too went to Cal Arts, yeah. And when Brad, after graduating Cal Arts, he would apply for Disney, but sadly, things were not looking too good for Brad. And in this case, not just for Brad, but like, say, John and Burton, all three of them getting fired, each one of them. And when it came to Brad, he was, how he got fired, well, he was in the same kind of territory as, say, Don Bluth, where each Don Bluth and Brad Bird, they had the sense of feeling that some of the magic of Disney was gone. Nothing was the same when Walt died, and when new faces stepped in, they took over, like most notably Ron Miller. And Brad Bird, he tried to, tell them that, we got to do something and we got to make things better and stuff like that. And he got booted off Disney. Yeah, he got fired, sadly. Lucky for Don Bluth, because he didn't have to get fired, because he resigned, along with 11 other animators. I'm sure you know that part, with Don Bluth, but yeah. But, things started to look pretty good for Brad. He would later on be a part of, say, The Simpsons and Family Dog. However, very later on, he would start to try doing some animation on the big screen. Like, at one point, do an animated feature, which didn't come to be. Then moving to Turner Animation, he was going to do, and was almost going to do, a feature animated film, which that being Ray Gun. Yeah. But sadly, enter Warner Brothers. When they bought Turner, everything from Turner, from CNN, yeah, Cartoon Network, etc., well, one of the things that they did when they acquired Turner, they canceled the planned animated feature film Ray Gun, and Brad felt screwed, like, what now? Because I can't do this anymore and such. Well, Warner Brothers was kind enough to offer Brad another animated project, showing him a list of animated projects that they had underway, that they were considering, and one of them being an animated project about a giant robot. And, by the way, this planned animated film about a giant robot was based off of a book called The Iron Man by the late Ted Hughes. Yeah. And Brad, he chose this animated project about a giant robot. It was originally going to, like, have some musical stuff to it, but Brad, he took it to the next level. He took it in a complete different direction. He pretty much told the whole story to the executives at Warner Brothers, and Brad even got some of his crew nervous and such, like, oh my gosh, what he's doing? Like, he's talking out to the executives of Warner Brothers, like, what's gonna happen after this? And most notably, when pitching the story that he came up with for this giant animated movie about a giant robot, one most notable thing he pointed out to them: what if a gun had a soul? And you see, Brad had some strong connections with this idea for this animated film, and the whole thing of what if a gun had a soul? Well, because sadly, Brad had a tragedy in the family where he sadly lost his sister to gun violence. his sister's husband shooting her. Just, if you know that, you know. It's really sad. And, again, the whole thing of what if a gun had a soul, but also, from the author, Ted Hughes, even he, too, had a similar thing as well, where, sadly, his first wife, which being, that was his first wife, I'm pulling it up, Sylvia Plath, she, basically committed suicide, and Ted Hughes wrote this book to ease the pain of his and his late wife's kids. So, you see? Yeah. Somehow and surprisingly, Warner Brothers was intrigued by Brad's pitch, and thus, the movie was underway, being titled The Iron Giant, and if I remember correctly, because, like I said, the book that Ted Hughes wrote being called The Iron Man, well, in the US, it was changed to The Iron Giant due to copyrights because we already have another character that goes by the name Iron Man, so, you know. Well, I'm sure, you know, it wasn't anything intentional from Ted Hughes, but yeah. And by the way, because Ted Hughes, well, he was well aware of what Brad Bird and his crew were doing, making this movie, and he was enjoying it. He was liking every single thing that Brad and the team were doing. But sadly, in 1998, he would sadly pass away, and as I recall, the movie is dedicated to his memory, which that's nice to see. And still, long story short, Brad and his team doing a pretty good job with the movie, but, at times, Brad was clashing with the Warner Brothers executives, as well as, the producer of the movie, because that didn't look pretty good. Eventually, when the movie was finally finished, it all went well, and Brad and his team being so excited that the movie would come out in theaters in all of its glory, and a crowd of people seeing this, but sadly, that didn't happen. And like I said, Warner Brothers not doing a really good job with advertising this movie. And it's like, well, Tarzan, Disney's Tarzan, for example, they had already had early teaser posters a year before it came out. The Iron Giant didn't. Like, what the heck, Warner Brothers? Yeah. And Brad and his team being so devastated and depressed for what would happen to the Iron Giant, although, like I said, the Iron Giant did receive a lot of praise from critics, but as for the box office, didn't look good at all. But it wasn't until Brad himself would receive a surprising phone call from Guillermo del Toro. Yeah. Del Toro obviously had seen the movie and was well aware of what happened and what was going on with Brad and his Iron Giant crew. And best side by Del Toro, he said to Brad that, "You have made a classic. This will stand the test of time, and it will not leave the hearts and minds of anyone who watches it." And boy, was Del Toro right. He was not wrong. Yeah, because even as of now, look how more appreciation and love that this movie has gotten. It's amazing, I tell ya. But yeah, anyways. But yeah, so there's your background. But yeah, so, getting into the film itself, because oh yes, and can't forget to do this, as always, for me, read the description / the story. In this animated adaptation of Ted Hughes' Cold War fable, a giant alien robot crash lands near the small town of Rockwell, Maine in 1957. Exploring the area, a local 9-year-old boy, Hogarth, discovers the robot and soon forms an unlikely friendship with him. When a paranoid government agent, Kent Mansley, becomes determined to destroy the robot, Hogarth and Beatnik Dean McCobbin, if I'm pronouncing the last name right, must do what they can to save the misunderstood machine. Alright, so, now that I finally read the description / the story, now let's get into the movie itself. Yeah, because, well, again, this movie taking place in 1957, and, First off, it's really cool, like, how the movie opens with the Warner Brothers logo. Because, fun fact, originally, it was supposed to open with the Warner Brothers, logo with Bugs Bunny, but Brad Bird wanted to do something different with it. And how it was done in The Iron Giant, really good. We still have that, the circle thing, that we would see in the Looney Tunes cartoons, and with the Warner Brothers logo popping, but we hear satellite sounds, like beacon and such. That's really cool. And because, we see, a Russian satellite, the Sputnik, which being launched, in the 1950s, and, when we see Earth, something has crash-landed on the Earth and such. And this sailor by the name of Earl Sutz, if I'm saying the last name right, being voiced by the late Emmett Walsh, notices something out in the stormy weather, and thinking that it's a lighthouse, but there's two lights, and oh, what's up with that? That's not normal. And, it's a giant metal man. Very big and such. Thankfully, Earl did survive when, say, his boat was tipped over by the waves, obviously that most notably coming from the giant metal man, and thankfully he made it to shore and was near an actual lighthouse. And then, the next day, we come to Rockwell, Maine. Yep. And one of the main characters that we see is, of course, Hogarth Hughes, being voiced by young Eli Marnthal. I think I am saying his last name right. Whom I think for a lot of us, even me, and for us Disney fanatics, we would know him best as Barry's human brother from The Country Bears. If you know, that's him. But I think that's probably what he's most known for. This and The Country Bears, I'm pretty sure, but anyways. But of course, most notably The Iron Giant, but Anyways, so Hogarth riding into town on his bike at a diner where his mother, Annie Hughes, being voiced by good old Jennifer Aniston, and if I remember correctly, because she originally was going to do a voice for Quest for Camelot, another Warner Brothers animated film, which I'm sure you guys are well aware of, came out a year before this, but she never got a voice role in Quest for Camelot, and thus she ended up voicing Annie in The Iron Giant, which is nice to see. Anyways, so Annie Hughes, a really good mother character in this movie. She's a single mom, works at a diner. We know a little. Even though the movie doesn't really establish that much of this, we do see a photo and so on. What we know is that, her late husband and the father of Hogarth was a fighter pilot, but sadly, he lost his life and So Annie doing her best, trying to take care of her son as a single mom while working at a diner, and a moment where Hogarth is trying to show his mom, a new friend of his, like a pet, basically, and Annie's not sure about this, because the last time Hogarth found a raccoon, but this time he found a squirrel, and unfortunately the squirrel gets loose, and at one point crawls up underneath someone's pants, and that being someone who is at the cafe Hogarth interacts with, and that being Dean, being voiced by Harry Connick Jr. And Dean is another pretty good character, too. And later on in this movie and how he develops and, his interactions with the Hughes and, how very slowly but surely a relationship would build for both Dean and Annie. So, just the interactions between Hogarth and Dean are good at first, even when Annie steps in. And not to mention, Dean and Hogarth overhear Earl talking with some other fellow, fishermen and such about what he saw last night, this giant metal man. Dean stands up for Earl, saying to them, "I've seen it too." And Hogarth, well, he believes too. And, it was even on the newspaper, maybe it was Sputnik, or to Hogarth, maybe it was invaders from Mars or something. But little do they know at first. And to speed things up because, yeah, later on, and then even after one moment where the squirrel is let loose, because, poor Dean, because he can feel the squirrel in his pants, and he unleashes the squirrel, unzipping his pants, and, yeah, chaos unleashes in the diner. But I'm sure as though, yeah, everything did settle down, and thank God for Annie, she didn't lose her job. So, Hogarth returning back home. Annie has not returned home because she's gonna be late and overworking at the diner. So, everything that Annie left for Hogarth in the microwave, but Hogarth's gonna do the opposite. Like, stay up late at 8, watch, science, scary movie and stuff like that, and eating dessert or whatever, which is what he does. However, at one point, what he's watching is interrupted when, the TV starts to, go static and such, and, probably it's the antenna, satellite dish and such, up top of the house. But when Hogarth goes to check it, something's quite off, literally. And Hogarth thinks that maybe it's invaders from Mars, and he gears himself up, he has a BB gun, tapes a flashlight to the BB gun, and thus goes to investigate what the commotion is out in the woods. But what he finds instead, and seeing, like, all the trees and, how they were destroyed and such, yeah, this is totally different. Like, this is something for real. And sure enough, Hogarth coming face to face with the giant himself. Yep. The giant basically is eating some metal because the giant's hungry, and the giant notices something else that's metal, which happens to be from the substation, which ends pretty badly, because the giant starts to get electrocuted, and then starts to get electrocuted by wires and such. Yeah, the poor giant, and sure enough, like, the power starts to go off in Rockwell, Maine. And as for Hogarth, because lucky for him, because not getting hurt or anything like that by this, he almost fled, but he was starting to feel bad, and when he heard the screams of the giant, that he had to do something, which he does. By turning off the power, literally, to save the giant passes out for a little bit, Hogarth gets up close, then the giant wakes up and such, yeah. And Annie, because she at that point came home, but Hogarth was not there, and, one point, and after the giant woke up after being electrocuted and such, Hogarth fled, Hogarth catching up with his mother and such, and, yeah. Yeah, and another thing about Hogarth's mother, Annie, is that, I like how, how she is in this movie, and, even when, like, Hogarth tries to explain to his mother that he saw a giant robot, but, Annie, under a lot of pressure, just, please, just stop with this, we don't get that whole thing of, oh, please, just not another one of your silly, ridiculous stories, or, like, you really just, you know what I'm saying? I'm glad that that's not a part of Annie's character, and we don't get that. That's nice to see. Yeah. It's done very different, and in a good way, But, yeah. But it doesn't take too long for this to be noticeable with what happened at the substation. Not to mention that Earl, he contacted the government about what he saw, and sure enough, someone from the government is sent to Rockwell, Maine to investigate this. And, whom could it be then, none other than Kent Mansley. Yeah, the jerk of this movie. He's technically the villain, but yeah, a villain jerk, how he's done specifically, you just want to punch him, Kent Mansley being voiced by the one and only good old Christopher McDonald. And Christopher McDonald, first off, Christopher McDonald, he has played a good chunk of, pardon my French, but it's true, a good chunk of asshole characters. Like, I can think of most notably, say, Flubber, Happy Gilmore, yeah? But more than those kind of characters, like, I also remember him best for being the main villain of superhero movie, with Drake Bell, Leslie Nielsen. He was the Hourglass Charm. Yep. And I also remember him best, and me being a Trekkie, and I'm sure some of you as well, he was the commander, first officer, Castile, in yesterday's Enterprise of the Enterprise C. And Castile and Tasha Yar would develop a relationship for one another and such. Yeah, so that's him as well. So, I mean, yeah, it's nice that he would once in a while play a good character, and as I just mentioned, his character from the episode of Next Generation. So, yeah, anyways. But, yeah, what Christopher McDonald brings to the voice performance of Kent Mansley is really good. Again, Kent Mansley being sent by the government to investigate this situation, and when construction guys are there, and one of them explaining to him about, how this specifically happened, and it's like, something, whatever it was munching on the metal and stuff like that. And Kent determined to get to the bottom of this. But anyways, and as for Hogarth, and still to speed things up, him at one point trying to locate and find the giant itself, well, not it, him, and as it's established later on, bringing a good chunk of metal for the giant to feast on, and for quite a while, he stayed in one position while keeping an eye if the giant did show up and eat that metal piece. But at one point, he fell asleep, but he woke up to a noise, and, well, the metal piece was gone, but he saw that it was, right next to him, and the giant is right there, looking down at him. Hogarth starts to run away, the giant follows him, and, well, Hogarth, realizing that there's no sign and indication that he is in danger, and that the giant is going to kill him, or crush him, for one thing, and the giant, at one point, sitting down on the ground, the same way as Hogarth does, his legs spread out and such. And Hogarth then starting to make communications and interact with the giant. Best example, teaching the giant how to talk. Can you go blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then, the whole rock, tree. And can't forget to mention the voice of the Iron Giant himself, the one and only Vin Diesel. Yeah. And fun fact, because Vin Diesel was recommended by a friend of Vin Diesel's who was working on the Iron Giant, recommended Vin Diesel to Brad Bird, and Brad Bird had seen a movie that Vin Diesel previously did and was amazed by Vin Diesel's performance in that movie. And so thus, Vin Diesel was chosen to voice the Iron Giant, and rightfully so. Especially when the crew at ILM altered his voice to make it sound robotical, and how it was done specifically, the way it sounded robotical, perfect. Not to mention, because why not mention him as well? Joe Johnston, the one and only Joe Johnston, being responsible for the design and look of the Iron Giant himself. And also, I thought of this, where Joe Johnston does have a very interesting design and look for whatever it is that he does. I mean, he's got to, obviously, especially since he's worked on Star Wars, he's got to stay true to how the specific ships, whatever it is that he is put in the position of designing, it's got to be Star Wars, But in this case, well, yeah. For the Iron Giant, for example, because the Iron Giant, has I want to say a mohawk or something, And it's just like how, say, The Rocketeer, which Joe Johnston directed that. The Rocketeer's helmet has a mohawk too. And actually, because, I don't know, because I would think that the Rocketeer's helmet and the head of the Iron Giant almost have the same kind of shape or something, but also the eyes, and actually, they gave the Iron Giant's eyes, a bit of, C-3PO or something, but yeah. So, if you think about it, and if you think so too, and if you think I make a good point, let me know in the comments section. Yeah, but anyways. So yeah, again, the whole thing of Hogarth teaching the Iron Giant how to speak English, and, well, at a certain point, Hogarth has to get back home, so he wouldn't worry his mother, and the Giant starts to follow Hogarth, but Hogarth is trying to tell the Giant to stay there. I go, no following. And those words would be very important very later on in the movie. Certain words and quotes that would be said in this movie that are very keen to this movie. You get my point. But yeah, the Giant, he's still following Hogarth until at one point, well, when Hogarth is right there where he and his mother live, walking over train tracks, the Giant then starts to feast on the metal and such of the train tracks. Hogarth telling him to stop, and to make things worse, an incoming train is coming in, and Hogarth is trying to get the Giant to put them back to where they were, which goes pretty well. The Giant is doing exactly what he needs to do by putting the pieces back together, but it's kind of too late because, well, he was in the way of the train. The train collided right into the Giant, and the train and the cars, they derailed, and the Giant, well, he was knocked out, but thankfully he wasn't killed. And, well, we notice that there's a couple of robotic pieces that are off of him, like his hands and so on, but a satellite piece, like, sticks out of the Giant's head, and basically, the robotic parts, they are alive, and they come back to the Iron Giant, like, reassembling. So that's nice to see. And another thing is, the Iron Giant having a dent, a bump, on his head, because, well, even Hogarth early on was asking the Giant, like, where he came from. And it seems like the Giant has no memory of where he came from and why he crash-landed on Earth. And probably because of the bump, the dent, you know, on top of his head. Yeah, and, well, after the whole train incident, well, once again, this draws the attention of Kent Mansley, and, well, apparently two drivers of the train who apparently saw the giant metal man. And basically, those two train drivers would happen to be two of Walt Disney's 9 old men, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson. And I think it's obvious that, well, their characters are named Frank and Ollie, because Ollie's character turns to Frank, you know, go ahead, Frank, tell them, because Kent was asking them questions on what happened specifically, and Frank's character telling Kent about that they saw a giant metal man where the train collided with a giant metal man. And yeah, this intrigues Kent some more, and, well, even when Kent was, wondering, like, could this be a giant metal man, even when, like, say, early on, he noticed that, his car was in half, like, half of his car was missing, and that was funny. And yeah, that's nice to see, because, you know, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, again, two of the members of Walt's 9 old men, which, by the way, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, they're two of Brad Bird's mentors and heroes. And if you know this, because Brad Bird, he met with Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson when he went to visit the Walt Disney Studios at a young age, even getting to meet one of the top best composers for Disney music and such, George Bruns. Lucky Brad, just, yeah. Frank and Ollie at first said to Brad, and they had a feeling that he was going to lose interest in animation quickly, but thankfully, boy, they were wrong, because later on, Brad would come back and he would show them some animation that he did of a bird, and if you know this story, you know. Just thought I'd mention it quickly, but yeah, nice to see, because yeah, Frank and Ollie making cameos in The Iron Giant, and how they would also make a cameo, most famously, in The Incredibles. If you know, you know. That was really good. Yeah, but anyway, so, Kent needs to use a telephone. Ollie points Kent in the direction of the the Hughes house, and yep, this is where Kent would first meet with the Hughes. And when early on, Hogarth snuck the giant in a shed, because yeah, they have a shed. Yeah, thankfully they succeeded on that. The coast was clear. Not quite, because one of the giant's hands is in the house, and when Annie asks Hogarth to say the blessing, the prayer, "Oh my God, thank you for this food, you know, get out of here, go, and get out of here, Satan," and just, that was funny. And then when he tells his mother that, "I gotta go wash my hands," and yeah, because, and trying to lure and get the, not lure, because, I mean, one of the hands of the giant does listen and cooperates, telling the giant's hand to get out of the house and go back to the giant himself. And by the way, because when Hogarth sees the giant's hand in the living room turning on the television, fun fact, because in the theatrical release, it was a Maypow cereal commercial, if I'm pronouncing that right, Maypo, you know. But in the signature edition, that would be changed to Tomorrowland. Because if you know this, originally Brad Bird wanted to include Tomorrowland in The Iron Giant, but Disney wouldn't allow this at the time. But thankfully, years later, and in 2015, when the signature edition of The Iron Giant happened, Disney did finally allow him to include Tomorrowland in The Iron Giant. And that same year, as we all know, Brad would direct Tomorrowland. And we know how that turned out, sadly. But say what you will, I actually really enjoyed Tomorrowland. But anyways, so that's nice to see that, yeah, featuring Tomorrowland, and because, you know, from Walt Disney's Disneyland and, you know, Tomorrowland, promise of things to come, and the rocket launching, that. Nice. Anyways, so yeah, Hogarth sneaking the giant's hand out of the house, but because, you know, trying to avoid, you know, his mother seeing the hand, but also Kent showing up. But thankfully, well, when, you know, trying to, you know, get the giant's hand, you know, out of sight, and when first interacting with Kent, and just, that's pretty funny, and Kent wanting to use the telephone to contact the government, and he gets in contact with General Rogard, if I'm saying his name right, being voiced by Martin Crane himself, the late John Mahoney. Yeah. Also, another fun fact is that, because Brad was sometimes clashing with those at Warner Brothers at first made suggestions on who should be a part of the voice cast. You know, they should have big names, like maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger, John Travolta as Dean. Oh my gosh. I'm sure they would have been good, but you know what? Whom is a part of the voice cast? They're perfect. Yeah, because, you know, again, from Harry Connick Jr., Jennifer Aniston, John Mahoney, need I go on? Just, yeah, perfect choices of those that, you know, did the voices of those characters. Oh, and can't forget to mention this, like, the duck and cover sequence, because in in Hogarth's class, yeah, that was pretty funny, because in Hogarth's class, and, you know, again, keep in mind, this is during the Cold War and such, and atomic bombs and stuff like that, you know, people being paranoid with certain things, and when it came to, yeah, like bombs and such, well, in Hogarth's class, well, there was like this 50s style cartoon that would play called Duck and Cover, and there was a little song number to it, which, by the way, would be done by the one and only Teddy Newton. And if you know Teddy Newton and his involvement with the Iron Giant, you know, it's like, to mention this, the whole thing of the X Factor with Teddy Newton, he storyboarded, you know, Dean and Annie going on a date and such, which was pretty funny, but, you know, according to those from the Iron Giant, and, well, Teddy being one of Brad's main top guys in animation, because here's another thing, because some of those that worked on the Iron Giant, they would once again work with Brad. Brad would bring on board a lot of his fellow animated workers and such from the Iron Giant onto the Incredibles, and Brad Bird being one of them. Not Brad, Teddy Newton. Teddy Newton, Brad Bird, Teddy Newton. Yeah, Teddy Newton being one of them, and to those, and how they feel towards Teddy Newton, nothing mean or anything, but just basically, what Teddy Newton would come up with would be the impossible. He would come up with certain things that, according to them, you would never think of in a million years. And sometimes, most of the time, it would be impossible to use. So, if I remember correctly, the duck and cover sequence was, I think, the only thing that Teddy Newton worked on and such. And, it's like, we'll give you this, Teddy, and I'll take it. And what he brought to the duck and cover sequence, hilarious. Yeah, and there's like an extended version, which is in the bonus features if you want to see it. And Teddy Newton, he voiced, was it the Gopher or Groundhog? I think Gopher, but, anyways. So, yeah. So can't forget to mention that. And actually, because a teacher that, had only, say, 1 or 2 lines, but sadly, she was cut. I think, that was Clarice Leachman. Yeah, Mrs. Tenzich, if I'm even saying that right, but anyways. Also, to name some of the other cast members, there's James Gammon, who voices 2 characters, Foreman Marv Loach and Floyd Turbukes, if I'm even saying that right, and, and the others, doing additional voices from Jack Angel, Bob Bergen, the late Mary Kay Bergman, Michael Bird, Devin Cole Borzoff, if I'm saying the last name right, Roger Bumpus, Robert Clotworthy, Jennifer Darling, Zach Eggington, if I'm saying that right, Paul Edding, Bill Farmer, Charles Howerton, and I already mentioned Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas, Phil Proctor, and Patty Tippo, Brian Tachi, if I'm saying that right, Sherry Lynn, so anyways, alright, so continuing on, because again, Kent making the phone call to the general, trying to explain and telling him about this giant metal man, but of course the general doesn't believe him, but maybe, Kent can do this. He can take some photos and such as evidence. Kent determined that for everybody to know that that what they're dealing with in Rockwell, Maine is a giant and such. And Kent saying goodbye to the Hughes. However, Kent discovers something because, he learns, and from, Annie, that Hogarth was in the woods last night when the giant metal man, where the giant metal man was, but Hogarth pretending that he did not see anything and such. But when Kent drives away, because early on it was discovered that there was a BB gun that part of it was broken, and Hogarth's name being written on the BB gun, the part of the gun was destroyed and such, and half of the letters were missing, And when Kent discovers, and because of the boy's name, first and last name, Hogarth Hughes, and looking at the BB gun, he may be onto something. And thus, trying to speak with Hogarth once again. But, because again, when trying to get one of the giant's hands out of the house and made his way into the bathroom, Hogarth pretending that he has to take a potty emergency and such, it was hilarious. But, that was funny. But anyways, so and to speed things up still, because, still, Kent trying to get to the bottom of this, and when he starts to discover, and possibly, maybe, Hogarth is in connections with this giant metal man. Hogarth, the more time he spends with the giant, feeding the giant and such, also, in the shed, wanting to read to the giant some stories, one of them being Superman. But there was another comic book that was about a bad guy, which Hogarth addresses to the giant that that's not who he is. He's not evil. That comic being Atomo, if I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah, Hogarth telling the giant that he can be like Superman, a good guy, a hero. And you know what? As Hogarth points out to the giant and Superman do share a lot in common. They crash-landed on Earth. They didn't know what their purpose was at first, but when Superman found out, and when the giant finds out as well later on in the movie. Yeah, so, yeah, and the whole thing of the giant at times saying, Superman, yeah. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I have seen, at times, concept art, well, not concept art, artwork, I should say, fan artwork of Superman and the Iron Giant crossing paths. That was nice. You know, not to mention that in the Multiverses game, you know, Superman and the Iron Giant would actually cross paths. Even most notably in one of the first trailers that was shown, where you had Superman come in and then the Iron Giant. Yeah, and by the way, because, you know, most famously, the Iron Giant wearing this S. Yeah, so, anyways. Which, yeah, we would see later on in the movie and until I get there, because, yeah. Anyways, so, yeah, and still, to speed things up, because, yeah, the more time that Hogarth and the Giant spent, and, well, when, you know, they are out one evening and they're, you know, at one point, it's a relief for them not being spotted, because the giant pretending to be something on a billboard, you know, for a restaurant, a hamburger and such, and Dean happens to be there. And, well, we discover later on, and when they found the jackpot for the giant, where, yeah, he can have an entire meal of metal and such, where they come up to a junkyard. And it just so happens that this junkyard is run by Dean himself. Yeah, because Dean, the more we know about Dean, well, he is quite a collector of junk and can sometimes make art with this junk and so on. Yeah. Also, more on Dean and Annie, because in the Signature Edition, there was one deleted scene, aside from, you know, the Tomorrowland being in there. Well, that was a bit different, you know. One deleted scene that made it into the film that, as I recall, Brad wished that this would have been in the film when it first came out, and eventually it finally did make its way into the movie in the Signature Edition. One scene where we get more of Dean and Annie talking in the diner, and, you know, they talk about Hogarth a little and such, which was pretty good. And with color added to it, and it looks like that, you know, it fits so well, and it's like it had been there the whole time. Don't you think? Just, yeah, the right tone of color as it is in the movie, that's what's important. Yeah. And, you know, because it had already been animated, but it wasn't finally colored or the layer and shading. It wasn't done until when the Signature Edition happened. So, anyways. So, yeah. And there's another deleted scene that made it into the final film, but until I get there, which is another important deleted scene. Rightfully so, being in the movie. Anyway, so, yeah, again, the Giant and Hogarth making their way into Dean's junkyard. And it doesn't take too long, even when, the Giant accidentally set off a car alarm when trying to feast on a car. A car alarm went off, and they're trying to dispose of it. The Giant's trying to destroy it, but then throws it in the air. And, well, of course, Dean heard this, and, well, thankfully for Hogarth, he distracted Dean, and the more conversations and interactions that they have, and Hogarth talking to Dean about his mother and stuff like that, just, you know, really good. And another great quote from this movie, which comes straight from Dean: "You are who you choose to be." Yeah. And how Hogarth would pass on what Dean said to the Giant: "You are who you choose to be." And in this case, for the Giant later on in the movie, choosing to be good and not be a gun and be like Superman. So, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, and still to speed things up, yeah, sure enough, Dean discovers and sees the Giant himself, Hogarth assuring Dean that he's good. He's with us, he's our friend. And Dean's still being freaked out by this, but he wants no part of this. And Hogarth trying to talk with Dean about allowing the giant to stay in his junkyard. It took 37 minutes for Hogarth to get Dean's attention. 37 minutes pass, and eventually Dean listened, and it's nice to see that it didn't take too long, for Dean to allow the giant to stay for a while in his junkyard, to keep him hidden and so on, But later on, and even when Hogarth returns back to the house, well, he discovers that Kent is back and has rented a room that, well, it was shown early on in the movie that there was a room for rent and such, and Dean took it. And now Hogarth is stuck with Kent, and Annie suggesting to Hogarth that he should take Kent out at town and such, and Hogarth basically teaching Kent the ways of a milkshake, chocolate, and stuff like that. But for Kent, well, he is on to Hogarth, technically. Just the mentioning about what could be residing in Rockwell, Maine. A giant metal man, the mentioning of Russia, the Sputnik and such, Yeah. And there was something that Hogarth put in Kent's milkshake which caused Kent, at one point, to use the bathroom, and then Hogarth fled, and to basically head back to check on the giant, and, well, things are looking pretty good for the giant, residing in Dean's junkyard. By this point, the giant has actually made some arts and crafts in Dean's junkyard, which Dean is quite impressed. And then, because, the more time that Hogarth and the giant spent in Dean's garage, there's one moment where the giant is spinning Hogarth around on a car, which was pretty funny, and then one sequence where they go out to the river, a lake and such, and Hogarth trying to get Dean to get into the water or something. Hogarth is freezing his butt off in the water, even getting the giant to jump in the water as well, which he does. But when the giant jumps in the water, it causes a huge splash and wave. Almost half of the river's gone. And Dean, being pulled by the water and such, sending him to the side of the road. That was funny. But, anyways, and still, to speed things up because, slowly but surely, things are not looking quite good for Hogarth, especially because, say, when, because, there's one moment where, after the lake and such, there's a moment with Hogarth and the giant where they spot a deer. The deer is not triggered by the giant and even touching the giant's tip of the finger and such, But gunshots go off, and we don't see it on screen, but when we see the deer again, it got shot. Two hunters that shot the deer notice the giant when the giant checks on the deer, and the two hunters see the giant, and it's the monster, and they flee. We never see those two hunters again. You would think they would report this immediately, right? But we don't see them again. Oh well, so much for them. But this is where the giant learns about death. And again, the whole thing of a gun shooting and such. And again, the whole thing of what if a gun had a soul and aimed directly at the giant? He's no gun. And a very important scene, and when, Hogarth is explaining to the giant about death and such. It's really emotional, And then, afterwards, because, Hogarth heading back home, the giant still residing in Dean's junkyard, but there's one moment where, and this is where we come to the second scene that was cut from the film originally, but put back in for the signature edition. The giant's nightmare sequence. This was another important moment, and rightfully so, for this to be in the movie, because, the giant starts to have a dream about, his other robot kinds and them being very destructive, and it's almost coming back to him clearly, like, why he was built and what his purpose was, and yeah. And even his nightmare makes its way on the TV that Dean is watching, which is pretty clever. And Dean getting a glimpse of this, and yeah, him almost realizing, because yeah, the giant, and just, yeah, But yeah, and with Hogarth, because when he made his way back home, well, he was interrogated by Kent, and I almost said Dean. Good thing I stopped myself quickly. It's Kent, not Dean. Kent interrogating him, and he's really on to Hogarth. He discovered early on, when looking at some photos from Hogarth's camera that he took when he first encountered the giant, one of those photos was a picture of him and the giant behind him, like early selfie, I guess you could say. But anyways, and yeah, Kent threatening and interrogating Hogarth, even threatening that Hogarth could be taken away by his mom. Jeez, like, that's too much, and that is unacceptable. And then to finish it off, Kent knocking him out with some specific stuff, you know, to put on his face with a, you know, tissue, napkin and such. You know, it's all a bad dream, and Hogarth finds himself awake in his bedroom, and he's determined at one point to warn the giant and Dean, but unfortunately, Kent beat him. His bedroom window was nailed, hammered and such, and Kent is going to keep an eye on him. And all throughout the night, while Dean is in the guest bedroom, and he's watching Hogarth, and Hogarth just, you know, even when he puts his helmet on, all throughout the night, and eventually when he did fall asleep, and then, well, even Kent, when morning hits, he almost fell asleep. But thankfully, yeah, because he managed to keep himself awake, and, well, he happened to see Hogarth walk by. He's already up and walking. Well, and because, like, what? And because the helmet is still in bed. Well, and how? Well, basically, Hogarth left that in bed, and I guess just to fool and trick with him, mess with him. Just, yeah, that was pretty funny. But yeah, by this point, it seems like, yeah, trouble is upon Hogarth and the giant, because Kent did call up the army and such, and the general, because, yeah, the information and evidence that Kent got, and, well, where the giant is located, because, unfortunately, Hogarth did tell Kent where the giant is, in Dean's junkyard garage, and, yeah, that's what happens, and Hogarth and Annie being brought along as well, and when they do arrive at Dean's junkyard, and in the shed, you know, where some planes and such are stored, well, what they find, technically, is the giant, but the giant is in disguise as like a arts and crafts plane, you know, and the army, like, they fall for this trick. Like, they don't discover and realize that it's the giant, and just, yeah, it works. Yeah, this disguise for the giant works. And, well, the general, he's very pissed off at Kent, and John Mahoney, the great John Mahoney, what he brings to the voice performance of the general and when scolding Kent, it's amazing. And Annie commenting, and I think, yeah, complimenting on what Dean had made and such, you know, it's nice, and just, you know, how she says it, and getting one last look at, well, little does she know that it's the giant, and yeah, whew, the coast is clear, and yeah, everything's good. And the more time that they spent in Dean's junkyard, and where we would see Hogarth and the giant playing a bit of, like, say, villains and heroes and such, and, well, the giant being Superman, and thus having the S. Yeah, so, because, like, at one point, Hogarth suggested to the giant that maybe he should play the villain, but the giant, he doesn't. He wants to play the hero, and thus Superman. So, yeah, And, you know, there were a few times because, you know, for the giant and after the nightmare he had, like, that haunting him and with guns and such. And when he happened to see, when Hogarth was playing the part of the bad guy with a water gun, this triggers the giant thinking that, yeah, because seeing a gun, and this triggers him, and he was almost about to kill Hogarth, but thankfully he didn't. And even when Dean stepped in, saving Hogarth, and you know, Hogarth, he's totally unfazed by this, like, and I guess, and maybe best, and yeah, even as Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, pointed out, maybe Hogarth knew that this would happen at some point, so I guess, but I don't know. There's no real indication in the movie. I don't know, but I guess so. And Dean, well, you know, telling Hogarth that, you know, he should not be trusted, and you almost did that to Hogarth, and the giant feeling so bad, and just, no, I'm no gun, and, you know, he just feels so awful, and this causes him to flee / run away. And it doesn't take too long for Dean to realize that the giant reacted to the gun, and this triggered the giant. Dean starts to really realize, and even when Hogarth, he was attempting to chase after and catch up to the giant, well, he wasn't able to, he wouldn't be able to do it by foot. It would take a while. No, because even when Dean then, you know, fires up a motorcycle, and thus they make their way trying to find the giant. And, well, even when we would cut back to the giant, he at one point happens to notice that there are a few boys that, pretty sure, because, yeah, they did spot the giant, yeah, but they're almost, they're pretty much, like, falling and holding on for their lives on top of this building. The giant heard this, and he can see what's happening to those boys. He runs into town, literally, in front of everybody in Rockwell, Maine, and even early on, he was almost about to do so in the evening, but Hogarth was quick enough to stop him that, yeah, they would not react very well to the appearance of the giant until now, because, yeah, especially, well, when he saved those boys, when they fell from one of those buildings, yeah, he catched them, and it doesn't take too long for the citizens of Rockwell, Maine to see that the giant saved those boys, and he's a friendly giant. Yeah, and, well, when Dean and Hogarth show up, well, everybody else, they start to notice and see the giant themselves. Kent and the army, they were about to leave Rockwell, Maine, and obviously head back to the base. Kent noticing this and getting all the other soldiers to look what's in town. They see this, and the general too. They're amazed, and they just can't believe what they're seeing as of now. And even Hogarth's mother, well, she takes it kind of well, I guess. You know, nothing too bad. But, yeah, I like that. Because, you know, hi, Mom. He waves, and the giant's smiling, and, you know, Dean, you know, to Annie, just like, yeah, that was great. But, pardon my French, but it's true. All hell breaks loose when the army starts to fire upon the giant. Little do they know that the giant saved these boys, and, well, the citizens of Rockwell, Maine, they immediately realize that the giant's friendly, and it's a mistake and such, and Kent, especially, God, what he's telling the army and to the general, God. And yeah, the sequence where the giant, along with Hogarth, you know, keeping Hogarth safe in his clutches, fleeing from the army, from the tanks, and them firing upon the giant, and even when the general calls up the White House, and fighter jets, and, well, even a Nautilus submarine, not to be confused with, like, say, the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's just a submarine called the Nautilus. They start to come into the oceans of Rockwell, Maine, to try to take down and defeat the Iron Giant. But again, little do they know that the Iron Giant is not who he is to them, you know. And, well, even at one point when they fell off a cliff, but thankfully, for the Iron Giant, for the first time, he discovers, and, well, Hogarth, of course, you know, that he can fly. He's got rockets and such beneath his feet, and thus, starts to launch in the air, and even Hogarth telling him to lift his fist up in the air like Superman. Yeah, so, and yeah, the jets firing upon the Iron Giant and such, and eventually, well, when the giant crashes and Hogarth, not dead, he's unconscious, and the giant, well, sadly at first, he thinks that Hogarth is dead, and it's just like the whole thing with the deer. Just, yeah, God. The reaction and the emotions that run through the giant when he thinks that Hogarth is dead, just, oh, that's so good. Really is. And, well, this triggers the giant even when he's once again fired upon. The bump/dent is no more, and thus he regains consciousness, who he actually is, and thus he starts to unleash hell on the army with his weapons and stuff like that, just like how we saw in his nightmare, his other fellow giants and what they're programmed to do. Yeah, jeez, it's crazy. But again, it's all because he is triggered by the guns and the weapons. Yeah, that's what triggers him. And, well, thankfully, Dean and Annie, they find Hogarth, and at first, they were going to take him to a hospital, but thankfully, Hogarth waking up in time and determined to get to the giant and get him to snap out of it. Meanwhile, because the army and Kent making a suggestion to the general that they should launch the missile on the giant, and telling the general that, you know, they can lure the giant out of the town, and then boom, launch the missile on the giant. And yeah, well, thankfully, and when Hogarth makes his way to the giant, because they found themselves back in town, Dean, Annie, and Hogarth, well, and they're being escorted away out of sight, you know, from what's happening. Hogarth, he managed to, you know, make his way to the giant, I should say, and getting him to wake up and to snap out of it. You don't have to be like this. You are who you choose to be. You're not a gun, and so on. And when the giant does snap out of it, and he sees that Hogarth is alive, and he was this close to zapping a submarine up from the water surface, but thankfully he missed, and it went farther down the ocean, and yeah. So the giant has woken up, and everything's good now. Almost, because, yeah. Dean trying to convince, you know, the general that everything's good now, and same thing for Hogarth, that the giant is not what he seems to be. But Kent, again, being an asshole he is, like telling the general to, you know, not to listen, it's a trick, launch the missile. But the general, well, he actually, slowly but surely, you know, starts to think that, okay, you know, maybe the giant isn't as bad as we thought it was at first, and because, you know, the boy is alive, Hogarth. But Kent, well, boy did he cross the line, because he grabbed the walkie-talkie right when the general was about to speak to the Nautilus on what to do next, Kent grabbing it and saying, "Launch the missile now!" And thus they do. Whew. And the general, of course, once again, being pissed off at Kent, and telling him, you know, that missile is aimed at the giant's current position. Where's the giant, Mansley? We can duck and cover. There's a shelter and such, and the general just setting him straight that there's no way to survive this, you idiot! You mean we're going to die, Mansley, for our country? And, well, Kent, he's not wanting to die, and then he says, screw our country, I'm gonna live. He gets on a army jeep and such, but the giant is quick enough to stop him, and they're gun pointing him, and, you know, keep him there, and, you know, like the rest of us, you know, like a good soldier, how the general, you know, says it, and, well, the sirens go off, and, well, Hogarth explaining to the giant that it's a missile, and when it comes down, everyone will die. And Annie asking Dean if they should find some place to hide, and Dean telling Annie, and he's not wrong when he says that it wouldn't matter, because there's really no way for them to survive this. Nobody. The citizens of Rockwell, Maine are doomed by this very moment. However, the giant, When looking down at the citizens of Rockwell, Maine, he knows what he has to do. He has to fix it. I fix. And he speaks to Hogarth, telling him the exact same words that Hogarth spoke to him. I go, no following. And just that hits you hard right there. Very emotional and very smart and brave of the giant, just, man, it's amazing. And it's amazing just how developed the giant became throughout this movie, really gaining a personality, emotion and stuff like that. It's amazing. And Hogarth, right before the giant takes off, telling and saying to the giant, I love you. And, well, the giant launches into the sky, making his way to stop the missile, and hearing the voice of Hogarth, the giant hearing the voice of Hogarth in his mind, you are who you choose to be. And the close-up shot of the giant, the last word he says is, Superman. And closing his eyes, boom. He saves everybody down on Rockwell, Maine, sacrificing himself, because of the missile and such, saving everybody, and most notably, Hogarth. And everybody cheering, and but it's also very emotional. Obviously for Hogarth, Dean, and Annie, even the general and the soldiers, they find this emotional too. And all that the general can say is, let's go home, and yeah. And, nice to see that they got to see that, yeah, the giant was not what he seemed to be. And, yeah, especially, most notably, the sacrifice the giant made. Later on, and the epilogue to this movie, there is a statue in memory of the giant, which Dean made himself. And now, officially, Annie and Dean are a couple. Even one moment where we see Hogarth playing with some of his schoolmates, better friendship there, especially after, because of the giant. And Dean surprises Hogarth with a package that the general gave to Hogarth. It was the only piece they found that was from the giant. Yeah. And the very last scene of the movie, well, I think, yeah, that same day, that evening, Hogarth awakens to the sound of the one piece from the giant that was recovered and was given to him, making its way to Hogarth's bedroom window. Well, that can only mean one thing, and Hogarth realizes, it doesn't take him too long to realize, that the giant, wherever he is out there, most notably his head, and with his body, is alive, and all of the pieces that were destroyed and were off of the giant, they're making their way back to where he is, in a snowy location. And the Hogarth saying, see you later. And, well, we seeing all those pieces from the giant making their way to him, and when the giant wakes up and he smiles directly at the camera, boom, the movie ends right there. And nice to see that the giant actually didn't die. He is alive, and, we're left to assume that maybe he would reunite with Hogarth and everybody else in Rockwell, Maine. That's nice to see. Yeah. Yeah, what a great way to end off the film right there, without a doubt. The Iron Giant, without a doubt, is an animated masterpiece. From beginning to end, the story, the characters, great voice acting, beautiful animation, and the fact that the giant, the titled character himself, being the only character that is computer animated, but with that touch of like 2D to him and to blend in with the rest of the environment of the Iron Giant film. Amazing, just really amazing. Brad Bird's direction, the music and score, the funny and hilarious moments, and with, a lot of great talents from Brad's team, again, most notably, as I mentioned early on, Teddy Newton with the duck and cover sequence, but more than that, the unexpected and intenseful moments that happen in this movie, just everything about the Iron Giant is amazing. And I'm giving the Iron Giant, well, what the heck, 10 out of 10 stars. Yes, 10 out of 10 stars for the Iron Giant. And what about you guys? What did you think of The Iron Giant itself? Is it one of your top favorite animated films? One of your favorites from Brad Bird, from Warner Brothers Animation? What was your first impression of it the first time you saw it? Like, if any of you, by any chance, got to see this in theaters, like if it was ever re-released in theaters, or if you ever watched it on TV, video, DVD, Blu-ray, digital, what are some of your favorite moments, your favorite characters, any moments that you laughed at and you cried over? I have no doubt. And if any of you that also got to see the signature edition and checked out the behind the scenes, the deleted scenes, and what was featured in the signature edition, almost lost it. If you've checked out the documentary, The Giant's Dream and such, yeah, just overall, what do you think of The Iron Giant itself, and with what I've had to say, my review, and yeah, what did you think of my review? Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of The Iron Giant. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and I'll see you guys in the next video / review. And, well, reviewing some of my all-time favorite movies has just begun. Stay tuned later tonight, because what I will be reviewing next, well, to best describe it, it's a pretty good, funny, hilarious comedy film that features the talents of Ben Stiller, Jack Black, and most notably, Robert Downey Jr. Do you know what it is? Some of you? Can you take a guess? If not, well, you'll just have to wait and see. Again, stay tuned for that. Take care, and peace out. And to finish off this review video, the money shot, Superman.